Five, four, three, two, one.
Good afternoon. It is Monday, April 29th, 2:30 p.m. And my name is Michael Herbert. I am the Ashland Town Manager. I'm joined here with our Assistant Town Manager, Jen Ball. And we're here to discuss the town meeting warrant scheduled for May 1st, Wednesday, May 1st, 7 p.m. at Ashland High School, annual town meeting, I should say. This is a town meeting that we're required to have every year by statute and by charter. It's a meeting where we handle a lot of the, I guess you could say, routine things that need to happen in the operations of a town, most notably the budget and, again, other operational warrant article items that we go through each year. And so our purpose here is to run through those and give you a little bit more background information on them. We have some people in the audience and people online, so we'll open it up to questions after each warrant article, after we describe each warrant article. And again, the purpose is to really give you, the resident and taxpayer, a little more information so you can come to town meeting a little bit more informed. Again, we do this as a service to the community, and hopefully you find it helpful. Jen, do you have anything you want to add? Okay. All right. So we'll just jump right into everything. So Article 1 is town reports. This is going to be an opportunity for myself just to give basically an overview of some of the bigger projects that were authorized by town meeting and the status of those and where they stand. I anticipate also seeing a presentation from the school committee regarding the FY25 budget. So pretty routine thing. We'll try to keep it brief so we can get on to the real business of the evening, if you will. And with that being said, we'll go to Article 2, which is the fiscal year 2025 budget. So this is my 10th budget since I've been here. I started as the Assistant Town Manager and Finance Director and subsequently moved to Town Manager. And I will say this has probably been the most challenging budget since I've been here. And there are a number of reasons for that. Notably, we're basically limited in how we can raise revenue. Plus, just like everybody at home are seeing their costs increase, we're seeing our costs increase here in the municipal budget. And so the bottom line is that when we put everything together and we put all the requests together and we made cuts and cut back on different requests, looked at our fixed costs and look at what we're getting into revenue, we actually were faced with a $1.2 million deficit that we needed to make up. And so this year we're using what we call one-time revenues to help make up that deficit. And one-time revenues are not a sustainable way to fund a budget, an ongoing operating budget, because, again, it's one-time revenues. So we had to get creative this year, and to make up that deficit, we dipped into ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan Act funds, that we had designated to help fix up the Valentine property. We also utilized what we call our overlay surplus accounts to help make up that deficit. Plus, we're also using the Special Education Stabilization Fund again this year, which is something that we did last year. But just to give you an overview of how we get to this point, I think probably the simplest, quickest, and most illustrative example I can give is each year our property taxes are allowed to go up 2.5%. Not individual homeowners' property taxes, but the tax levy itself. So 2.5% plus whatever we have in new growth. New growth are things like new developments that happen. If you do an addition on your home, that usually increases the assessed value. That's classified as new growth. And historically, what the town has done, and this goes back to the 80s, is relied on new developments to basically increase the tax base for the town. And of course, new developments, they bring in more revenue, but they also have costs associated with it, and they impact our quality of life. But again, traditionally, this town, as opposed to some of our surrounding towns, have chosen to utilize new growth and new developments to essentially help subsidize the budget. But over the last 5-6 years, what we have done is we have proactively taken a slow growth approach. So one of the things that we've done, probably remember, is we've bought a lot of property over the years. And so not only do we basically incur the expense for acquiring that property, but we also take it off the tax rolls. So it's kind of a double financial impact. Again, you get the benefits of increased quality of life, open space, et cetera, but there is a cost to it. And so this year we actually have less new growth than we had last year. And if you look at it all, we're probably about $800,000 less this year in new growth than we were at our peak a few years ago. And so just again, that's kind of a circular way of getting to my point. But our 2.5% increase is $1.3 million this year, so $1,328,000. So against that, just our health insurance expenses and our building and liability expenses went up $1.1 million. So before we even start looking at programs, services, et cetera, out of that $1.3 million, 2.5 increase, $1.1 million is already spoken for right off the bat, just to pay for fixed costs like our insurance. So that is kind of an example, a quick example of the financial squeeze that we find ourselves in. And this is something that we're going to have a discussion about over the next year. Anytime you have a budget situation, just like at home, it's the same way for an organization or a company, same way for a municipality. When you have a budget deficit, there's two ways to fix it. You either increase your revenues or you reduce your expenses. And so we need to have a conversation over the next year about how we're going to address this. Are we going to look at cutting expenses? And I would say, given our expenditures and some of the common metrics that we utilize across the state to measure basically efficiency of our spending, we're really very, very efficient if you look at those statistics. So, obviously, if we make cuts, it's going to have an impact to services, significant impact to services. So then, if you're not going to go in that direction, then you have to look at increasing your revenue base. And again, there's two ways really that municipalities have control over that. The first is to basically authorize or approve new developments, again, which increases your new growth, which add to your tax base. And like I said before, there are trade-offs associated with that. I'll just basically quantify it as quality of life issues. Or you look at a vote, which is called an override vote, which would basically allow you to go over the 2.5% increase. And at this point in time, I'm not advocating for any one of these approaches, but we do have to have the conversation as a community over the next year, or else we're going to be in a whole world of hurt next year. So that's kind of the overall budget situation. There is one little unique thing about this year's budget compared to previous budgets, is this year basically we're required so I mentioned the ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan Act funds, and so the select board had chosen a number of projects to spend that money on. But we have some deadlines that we have to basically deal with and address. And so the way we're doing it this year is we're actually taking that ARPA revenue, the remainder of that ARPA revenue, and using it as a revenue source, again, partially to pay for the operating budget. But then on the expenditure side, you're going to see under capital projects a list of the projects that we plan on funding with those ARPA funds. So it's really more of an accounting mechanism as opposed to a policy change, but it is something different that we're doing with this budget compared to previous budgets. So before I get into the detail, are any questions related to what I've said so far? Mr. DeSoni, let's see you there.
Okay,
Be gentle, Mark.
I'll be gentle, but my camera is not being on because the host doesn't want it on.
Okay.
So I'm gonna be talking into the dark here. Okay, the growth of the minus growth of housing in the town is a negative, but and I agree with not doing an override, but I would also like to see if any of the housing reasons are zoned reasons to change the bylaws to bring in newer personalities of growth. That's my comment.
So, Mark, when you say personalities of growth, are you talking about things other than residential? So, like businesses?
Mix, science, climate,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, so I think, so the question is, we're talking about residential growth, but is there an opportunity to bring in businesses and not just residential? And is zoning a part of that? I would say yes. Our economic development director is always looking at opportunities to bring in businesses, and we have some unique programs, and she's been pretty successful at bringing those in. And we're always taking a look at our zoning and seeing if it makes sense and seeing if it incentivizes businesses to come in. But whether or not businesses come in is more of a function of economics than it is of zoning. And for a business to come in, a number of things have to line up. So it has to, if you're talking about like a retail store, it has to be financially feasible, meaning that the business owner has to feel that if they make this investment in the community, into a brick and mortar store, into personnel, they have to feel comfortable that they're going to get that money back and make a profit. That's just common sense. And also as an extension of that, if they are looking at getting financing to help open their business or make renovations, the bank, essentially, or the lender, has to feel comfortable that that business is going to generate enough money to pay back the interest in the principal on that loan, essentially. So, again, a business has to feel like they're going to make money, especially for a retail situation. And I will just, my personal opinion is that Ashland likes to talk a lot about having shops. You hear that a lot in retail here, but when we do have it here, they get very little support. And I think you see that with some of these downtown businesses. So we can't necessarily say on the front end that we want to have businesses, but then when they come in here, not support them financially. So that's one thing. If you're looking at businesses like biotech and stuff like that, there's obviously the financial component associated with it, and they have to meet those requirements. But then there's other things that they have to look at as well. One of the things they look at is there adequate housing in the region to basically support that business and bring in workers. There's other infrastructure things that they look for. So like with biotech, they're looking at water, right? So they're looking, do you have adequate water to basically do their operations? So it was a pretty long answer, Mark, so I wasn't successful in making it succinct, but hopefully that was helpful.
And I know that the town had and this town and state's having a hard time with the MBA housing community. Can that be involved in the zoning too?
Mark, can we hold that one off until we get to the end where we just talk briefly about MBTA zoning? Is that okay?
Okay.
All right.
I can hold on to that. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, that was actually a really good question. So I gave you, again, just the general budget overview, and I'll give you some, basically some particulars. Another thing that we did with this budget in order to address the deficit is we've shifted a lot more onto things that we call revolving funds. These are funds that are really department specific and help fund operations. They're kind of used as a supplement to general fund, which is what you vote on. But again, we're leaning on them a little bit more heavily this year than we were in previous years. So that being said, I'll just go through the general categories that town meeting will be voting on. So under administration, which includes things like the town manager's office, purchasing, town council, clerk, human resources. So in total, all of those departments, that's going up $93,905, or about 4.45%. The finance departments, which include the town accountant, the assessor's office, and treasurer's office, that's actually going down $7,000, or a little over 1%. Going to development services, which include departments such as the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, and Inspectional Services, that's going down $20,000, a little over $20,000, or 4%. That is a good example within those departments, is a good example of shifting more towards our revolving funds. Going to our public safety departments, that is going up a total of $191,000, or 2.76%. You'll see a big increase in the police department budget, but not necessarily a huge increase in the fire department budget. Again, that's because we have a revolving fund in the fire department that we are shifting more of our expenses to. I think 150,000 more than in previous years. Moving on to health and human services, which includes the health department, council on aging, recreation, veteran services, prevention and human services, and the public library. So that is going up a total of almost $75,000, or 6%. And then getting to public works, which includes obviously administration, highway, cemetery, parks and trees, our public facilities. So that's actually going up $68,000, or a little over 3%. And I'd say a good chunk of that is an increase in our facilities maintenance budget to basically help take care of some of these new buildings that we brought online. So going to education, so that is going up a total of $1.5 million, or 3.8%. School department's going up by 1.6. Keefe Tech, our assessment to Keefe Tech, is going down 62,000. You know, I spit out these numbers. I get to the school department, and you hear 1.6 million when you're hearing other numbers like going up 70,000 and stuff like that. And obviously, that's going to jump out. First of all, that is not an anomaly with any Massachusetts cities and towns. School departments generally take up, you know, roughly half municipal budgets. Again, this isn't strange. I will say that the school department does a very good job of creating value for the town. If you look at some of their objective metrics, like expenditures per student, we're actually, I think, below the state average. And I think, you know, those of you that have kids in the school system or have had kids in the school system, I think and I hope you would agree that we provide a pretty good value for what is spent. Next is debt, which includes what we call non-excluded debt and then also excluded debt. And excluded debt is that debt that has been authorized to go above that 2.5% tax levy limit. And so basically those come in the form of what we call debt exclusions. Our most recent two being the new school, the new Mendez School, and then also the new public safety building. So between those two, that's actually going down almost $700,000 or almost 9%. So we got a little bit of relief there. And that's based on basically the amortization schedule and everything. So again, a little good news there. We get to the capital projects. So traditionally, this has been funded 4 years ago. It was funded at $750,000. Over the years, because of budget squeezes, that got whittled down to zero. But again, this year, we're using that ARPA funding scenario, which I described earlier, to fund those projects, and that totals about $2.7 million. And that includes basically $430,000 for the Valentine project, $700,000 that we've put in for land acquisition, $465,000 for sidewalks, $1 million for turf field replacement, and then also $95,000 for small business assistance. So that's capital projects. And then we get to basically benefits and insurance, which I described a little bit before, but you know, that includes our retirement assessment, health insurance, workers' comp, unemployment. That is going up a total of $1.1 million, almost 9.5%. So again, that's a pretty significant increase. So overall, in our general fund, that is going up $5.1 million, 6.75%. That's a little bit misleading because you've got an additional basically $2.7 million in capital through the ARPA funds that, again, is an anomaly. That's not necessarily included each year. So I think your real increase is about half of that, so $2.5 million bucks. So that's the general fund. Then we have what's known as our enterprise funds. So these are separate funds for individual services that are provided for the town, and they're based on user fees. So the water enterprise fund, sewer enterprise fund, trash collection, field management, cable access stations, stormwater, all of those are individual enterprise funds. And so that is going, so the water enterprise fund is going up $237,000, and that's mainly to pay for some capital expenses, some large capital expenses for our infrastructure. Sewer enterprise this year is going down $154,000, and that's essentially because we're using one-time revenue that's available in the sewer enterprise fund. We call it retained earnings to decrease that. Trash collection is going up $79,000. Field management is basically level funded. Cable access is going down $45,000, and stormwater is going up $51,000. So when you take the general fund and you add in the increases and the decreases in the enterprise funds, that total comes out to that's an increase of $5.3 million, or just a little under 6%. And if you just go through the warrant, you'll see also basically some of the revolving accounts that we're utilizing to offset things. And then we also have the Economic Development Special Revenue Fund that you'd be voting on, which totals $306,000. And that is funded through the local options meals tax. So, yeah, does anybody have any questions? Mark, you got your hand raised?
Yes, I do. You mentioned infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any chance that this town could get some monies to fix some of the roads and bridges?
Oh, that's a really good question, Mark. That's a really good question. So you can fund roads and bridges through basically local funding, right? So appropriations through the general fund. Or you could get state funding, whether through what we call formula-based funds or grants. And I can tell you, I've described the financial situation, I think, fairly adequately. So you can see the opportunity to fund it with local funds is very limited. There's a state funding program called Chapter 90, which again is a formula-based funding system from the state. We get about $450,000 each year in Chapter 90. It's something that we have advocated at the local level. A group of local officials have advocated for doubling that over the years, and we just haven't been successful. So $450,000 might sound like a lot, but to fully reconstruct a mile of road, just a mile, is about $900,000, and that's to fully reconstruct it. So you can do things like fully reconstruct it, which is basically removing all the pavement, all the sub-base, redoing all of that again. Or you can do something called mill and overlay, which is basically scrape off the top and put a new layer of asphalt on it. If you do mill and overlay, it's a little bit less than full depth, what we call full depth reconstruction. And then also bridges, we don't have formula grants, but there's also competitive grants out there. So there is state money out there, just not enough of it, Mark. How's that?
Is there a way of a chance that you can take out from the monies for buildings or municipals to build up the funds, or at least for the bridges, to be more solid, so that the buildings may have businesses, municipal, fire department, public safety building, whatever, but you need strong roads and bridges to transport through to get the vehicles, emergency extras and stuff like that, to have it. But if you don't have a strong, sturdy structure of bridge or roads, it's going to be a problem later down the road.
Pardon the pun, right, Mark?
Or down the road, or there'll be a dead end.
There you go. So yeah, Mark, you can always change how you appropriate funds, but so you're talking about taking money out of the facilities budget to fund roads and bridges. So, but if you take that money out of the facilities budget, you're not maintaining your buildings. So you got to pick your poison in some way. When you get in situations like this, where you're basically robbing Peter to pay Paul, those are judgment decisions. So the short answer is yes, we could always divert funds from facilities to help pay for roads and bridges, but that means that the buildings are not going to get maintained, and so that's going to lead to higher costs in the future.
Okay, so I'm trying to do my 208 Street compromise then. The buildings, the public safety building, the new Mendez building, they're all done and ready and separate from everything else. So they don't have to be funded quickly right away. Why can't that money go to the bridges? Yeah.
So Mark, you're always doing maintenance. I think even from the very beginning. Obviously not that much, but so there's repairs and then there's also preventive maintenance. So you want to fund preventive maintenance because it's basically a lot less expensive to basically do that preventive work than it is to let things go, let them break, and then do repairs. So the preventive maintenance, making sure that your HVAC systems are doing great, things like that. That's a good investment. And that being said, even if we said, okay, we're not going to fund that, I think, the amount that we're talking about is probably not really going to make a dent in the road repairs or the bridges. I mean, you're talking 50, 100K, maybe.
Okay, and my last couple thoughts before I put myself on mute is one, the Cornerville Road Bridge was worked on.
Mm-hmm.
And that was money that was put aside from how was that money put aside for that?
Okay, that's a good question, because before we funded $150,000, I believe, for Corderville Road, so the Corderville Road Bridge. So, and Actually, the repair of the bridge itself is going to be paid for by the state. But the money that we put in locally is we have to basically, we have to set up like a temporary bridge structure while those repairs are going on. So that's I think that's the money you're referring to.
And my last, somewhat knowing this answer already, DPW personnel is not exactly city-wide mended because of people, the number of people that's in the DPW. How would they be affected by the capital plan?
So how are our DPW personnel affected by the capital plan?
Basically, they work for the town. They have they work all throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
And this town is not exactly granted city bonds. We're a small town, so we don't get bonds, right?
No, we have bonds. Yep.
Can that help expand the personnel in the DPW for their work loads?
No, so bonds you don't use for personnel or like operating expenses. Bonds help you finance capital projects.
Okay, then I'm starting to lose myself, and I'll just be quiet for a little while.
Oh, you're fine, Mark. These are good questions. Anybody else have any questions regarding the budget? If not, I'll move on to Article 3. Okay, so Article 3 is a transfer to our OPEB trust. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits, and it's a fancy way of saying retiree health insurance. So this is a liability that we're now accounting for and we're now planning for, whereas 10 years ago we didn't. But we started doing that because it's good long-term financial planning. And so each year what we do is we basically take a portion of money for each new employee that we bring on and basically allocate it to this OPEB trust. And so that is what this this appropriation is. So any questions? Okay. Okay, so Article 4, it's a transfer from our Special Education Stabilization Fund to the General Fund. I referenced this before when I was talking about the budget overall. So this is the second year where we're taking $250,000 out of this fund, which is designed to pay for what we call out-of-district special education costs. Taking $250 out of that and basically using it to pay for those costs that are within the budget. So we have a cap of $600,000 on this fund. I believe it is still at its maximum because even though we took money out last year, we have a way to replenish it whenever we get our free cash amounts. And so I believe we replenished it, I'll have to look, at the full amount. So we still have $600,000 in there. So this would be taking $250,000 out of that. And again, when we get our free cash number in the fall, there will be a percentage of that free cash that basically replenishes that fund. Any questions? Okay. So Article 5, it's an annual consent article. So this basically has a number of different things within one article. They're really routine. That's why they're bundled up as what we call a consent article. It includes grant program authorization, road contracts, other types of contracts, lease purchase agreements, and then also revolving funds. I mentioned revolving funds before when we were talking about the budget. Some of those revolving funds have to be authorized each year, and so that is what that's what this portion of the consent article does. And again, it's usually very routine. This year is a little bit different. Jen, do you want to explain a little bit what we're doing differently this year?
Sure. So if you So the only change we're really making is that we previously had a revolving account that collected fees or rental fees from our community center. So there's a large room there that community members will rent for parties or other things. And so we're just expanding that revolving account to include all town buildings. Partially, this is in anticipation that we'll start to receive rent from the old fire station that will be a brewery, and we'll be receiving monthly rent. And then also down the road, if we're able to rent potentially Valentine or other properties, we'll have one place that will collect the funds. And that way, if we do have a maintenance issue, we'll be able to utilize that funds.
Okay. Any questions regarding the consent article? All right, seeing none. Then we move to our second consent article, which is actually related to the Community Preservation Act. And following that, we do have a CPA standalone article. And Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can discuss those and give my voice a break.
Sure. So each year we have a consent article for CPC, and that really is just laying out the appropriations each year, and then the payments for previously authorized bonds. So if you go through, there's previously authorized bonds for Oak Street, as well as the purchasing of the high school athletic fields, Warren Woods, and then lastly our Valentine estate. And so those are pretty routine. We've already authorized the purchase, and these are just the payments. Any questions on that one? No? So we can move on to Article 7. So that's appropriating CPC funds. So each year at both annual and sometimes also at our special town meeting in November, CPC will recommend funding applications to town meeting, and town meeting has to approve those. This year, they're recommending an interior painting project at our library. So as part of the, in the older section of the library, we had some peeling. Over the last year, we did have a preservationist come in and do an analysis on the type of paint to make sure that we maintain the historical integrity. And so they gave us a quote for $40,000 to do the painting, and then also that includes having somebody from the preservation, somebody from historic preservation that will be able to do administrative oversight to make sure that the paint matches and it's being done in accordance to maintain the historical nature of that building. And typically, CPC funds run for 2 years, and if it's not spent, then it's given back to CPC. Any questions on that one?
Okay. So we'll move on to the next article, which is to authorize the select board to accept a gift of land. And actually, it's several pieces of land. And this is property that is being gifted to the town from the Hopkinton Area Land Trust, which owns these parcels. And they feel like it's in their best interest if the town takes over those parcels. They're relatively small, about 4 of them. And yeah, I mean, that's about it. You know, right now there's no plan to do anything with these parcels other than to keep them as open space, and essentially this gives the select board the ability to do that. Any questions? It's always, I think it's always good when a municipality has the opportunity to acquire land. Obviously, there's opportunity costs, as I mentioned before, associated with that. But again, these are relatively small parcels. So if seeing no questions on that one, I'll move to Article 9. And this is reauthorizing a borrowing that was done at a previous town meeting. And essentially what happened here is there was a miscommunication between the town and bond counsel, which is essentially the legal team that is associated with signing off on borrowings. There's a lot of legal work that has to happen because, you know, some of these borrowings can be very, very big. and investors want to make sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and that, you know, they're going to get their money back. And again, there's all types of, you know, legal nuances that have to be met. So essentially, what we're asking to do here is basically increase the authorization by 200,000. The way we had it written is we thought we didn't have to do that. When it was authorized and we went to bond council, they interpreted it a different way. And so essentially there's no new authorizations that are, no new projects that are being authorized here. It's simply for the tower truck, or what we call the ladder truck, for the fire department, and then also a couple $100,000 to do the girls and boys locker rooms at the middle school. Anything you want to add about that, JB? Okay. Any questions? Yeah, Claudia.
What's the bathroom renovation at the Mendez?
So that was the
old Mendez?
yes, it was the old Mendez School. So this is basically what you're seeing in that chart is money that was borrowed to do those projects. And then after those projects were completed, we had a sum of money left over. So that's the amount of money that we have left over to be reauthorized.
Somebody's gonna ask.
Probably. It's a good question. It's a good question. Okay, any others? All right. Moving on to Article 10, which is reauthorizing the public safety building bond. So if you recall, there were two authorizations, bond authorizations related to the public safety building. So one for engineering and then one for essentially construction costs and related expenses. One of the things that came, I think we realized as we were going through the process, is that it was in the town's best interest to actually acquire the property owned by Fafford that was surrounding the property that the public safety building was built on. And reasons are multifold. So the first is to really give more parking for the public safety building. Increase the amount of parking there. There is also an interest by the Upper Charles Trail Committee in the town to basically put a portion of the Upper Charles Trail along that property. It fits in with the planning and connecting to other points on the Upper Charles Trail. Potentially, we could use it with a lot of site work for expanding Wildwood Cemetery, which is, believe it or not, running out of space. But essentially, in order to use those funds to help acquire that property, we need to have a vote which enhances or expands the authorization to include land acquisition. So I want to be very, very clear that this is not increasing the amount that was authorized. It's just expanding the purpose for which that money can be used. Did I cover it pretty much? Okay. Any questions? All right. We're getting there, folks. So Article 11, it's another bond-related article, and this is to basically authorize improvements in our water treatment plant. So specifically, what we're looking at doing is replacing what we call our ozone system, which is essentially our primary in filtration system and essentially our first line of defense. So the water treatment plant was built a little over 20 years ago. So obviously some of the components are 20 years old. And there's wear and tear, just like, again, you experience in your own homes with mechanical equipment. And so this is a request to borrow and appropriate $4 million for the replacement of that ozone system. Again, it's a really, really important component of our water system. And, there's obviously some health and public safety issues related to that if we don't replace it. But then there's also, I'll classify it as aesthetic issues. So this ozone filter is what gets your water clear. Basically filters out a lot of particles, mainly manganese, and there's one other that escapes me right now. So we're looking at, basically the cost is $4 million. But we also anticipate getting $1 million from the town of Hopkinton to help pay for this. So the amount we actually end up borrowing could be closer to $3 million. And the reason for that is that Hopkinton actually gets a portion of their water from us, roughly 25%.
Is the superintendent going to be present to give a little quick presentation on this or not?
So yes, so Dan Maurer, who is our water sewer general foreman, will be there to answer questions on this article. And Mark?
Okay, thank you. 20 years old, it's been built. That means 20 years old, the pipes and the instruments to regulate and get data out of the building to read. Hopkinton saying they're going to help pay for it. Is Hopkinton going to help pay for it because of their Ledgmere property?
Nope, so Hopkinton is looking at paying for it because they actually have a contract with us that says that they pay for a percentage of the costs associated with running the treatment plant. So that includes operating costs. So it equates to roughly a quarter of the operating costs. They help pay for that, but then also capital costs as well.
So, okay, then what about the Hopkinton Reservoir Ashland part of it? Does that go with the cost of upgrading that?
Say that again, Mark. I'm sorry. The train.
The Ashland Reservoir, Hopkinton Reservoir, they're almost like borderline together.
Mm-hmm.
Hopkinton is going to help pay 25%. Is that going towards updating the reservoir input to the water tower, to the water treatment plant?
No, what I'm referring to here, Mark, is Hopkinton's portion would be there to help pay for the ozone filter.
And ozone is the, if I'm wrong, please say I am, the EPA part of things?
So I'm sure the EPA has something to do with it, Mark, but basically the ozone filter is one of our primary treatment methods for the water. So you take the raw water out of the ground, right, from the aquifer, goes into your water treatment plant, it gets treated, and then it gets distributed out to the homes.
So it's a purifier.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. So that's it for our borrowing articles. Next, we'll move to bylaw updates and changes. So Article 12 is updating our demo delay bylaw for historically or architecturally significant buildings. I saw Joan Gonfriday was on here, but she left. But essentially, what this change does is it says, so currently the way it's set up, so if you want to tear down a historical building, it essentially has to go before the historical commission, who has an opportunity to place a demo delay on that property. Now, a couple years ago, that demo delay was 9 months. We went to town meeting last year or the year before, increased that to 12 months. But the way it worked is that once that demo delay was put on, basically, whether or not the property changed hands or and came up with a new plan or changed, essentially changed ownership, the new owner, the new plan wouldn't have to go back and have another demo delay. So you could theoretically have a property, let's just say, well, I'll give the mill property as an example. So a few years ago, the owner of the mill property, 10 to 60 Main Street, was looking at redeveloping that property and submitted a demo application because they were looking at demoing a couple of the buildings. So the Historical Commission heard that and put a demo delay on that building. And so the owner had a plan. I think it was around 200 units, 34,000 square feet of commercial space. Demo delay went on, 9 months passed. Okay, demo delay is done. So what has subsequently happened is that the landowner has entered into an agreement with a new developer to basically do a different plan, which consists of 250 units and significantly less commercial space, and it's being done as a 40B project. So that plan doesn't have to go through the demo delay process again, so because it's already gone through the demo delay. So essentially these changes to the bylaw close that loophole, and it basically says that the building or premises changes ownership, the new owner must resubmit a request for a demo permit, and the demo delay process will be repeated. And likewise, after 3 years from the date of the determination, so in the absence of an accepted plan by the planning board, the demo delay process will have to be repeated regardless of ownership. So if an owner / developer gets a plan, goes through the demo delay process, or gets a plan approved, I should say, goes through the demo delay process, and 3 years after that, they haven't acted on that plan, they'll have to go through the demo delay process again. So that's essentially a summary of the changes that are being proposed. Anything? Any questions? Okay. Article 13 is, again, updating a bylaw to accept the specialized stretch code. So this was an article that was brought before a previous town meeting that either got voted down or it got tabled. I don't remember exactly what. But the Sustainability Committee went back and worked with a number of other stakeholders to basically revise this, basically revise the presentation and answer a lot of unanswered questions that basically existed. And essentially what this does is basically it imposes new requirements for energy efficiency on new construction moving forward. So I don't have the exact requirements, but I believe that all buildings, all new buildings, if this is successful and the town adopts it, all new buildings will need to be basically solar ready or electric ready. I think chargers, EV charging stations will have to be incorporated as part of the building. There are a number of things, and the Sustainability Committee will have essentially a presentation at town meeting that describes those more specifically. Think there are any big ones I missed, JB, on that one? Okay, so that's about that. Mark, you have a question?
Sustainability. My extra little, what I want this town to have through and through for the future. This bylaw they're trying to put up, first town meeting was a misunderstanding of the information, but it was the first time that the regular people did not understand it, and other committee people said it was just not ready for this town or ready for this town. That was the first town meeting. This one has, like you said, it's been worked on, been brought around to public forums and talked other couple of peoples and everything. This is new construction, yes. Electricity part of the construction of the new buildings. and to go with what already the state has working. We're just going to try to, we want to add into what they have set to understand what's going on for new construction. And this will also help the new developers with new construction to understand what Ashland is going to be asking for, and can the two-way street talk through, compromise, and understand together for what it is. So sustainability is working on this. It's new construction. It should be voted almost 2/3. But I'm going to vote for it as it goes through. But that's basically what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, Julie, you have one?
Will this apply to new homes or just like bigger buildings? Is this all buildings?
I believe it's all buildings. Yeah. Cool. All right. All right, the last article is related to the MBTA Communities Act that was passed a couple years ago by the legislature. And it was going to be a zoning change that put us in compliance with the MBTA Communities Law. So this is on the warrant. However, at the April 25th planning board meeting, the planning board made a decision to keep that hearing open, which is a fancy way of saying that this is not going to be taken up at this town meeting. So it's still in the warrant. However, I believe the moderator, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, plans on, after the budget?
After the financial article.
Yeah, after the financial articles, basically moving this up and explaining to everybody that's not going to be voted on. So if you're there specifically just to vote on that, you don't have to wait all night. Now, according to the law, we have to have basically compliant zoning in place by the end of this calendar year. We normally have a town meeting in the fall. We can also have a special town meeting basically any time of year that we want. And so it's anticipated that basically this would be coming back at the fall town meeting. The reason this is being done is several-fold. I think, you know, the town feels like it's probably prudent to see how some things play out at the statewide level before moving forward with this. But I think more locally, what has happened since this was originally proposed is we've had two 40B projects, which are large multifamily development projects that basically are outside of our zoning. Two 40B projects have been proposed, and again, it's prudent to see basically how those shape out for a little bit before making a decision on this really important and critical zoning moving forward. So hopefully I didn't make that more cryptic than it is. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Yes, Mark.
I was at that planning board meeting when this came up. I said at the time they gave me time to speak is it's just going around in circles, and the two words that stuck out to me was maybe and if. If the state can look and be helping us to recognize what it meant to be, and maybe the town can fix things for the 40B housing, for the housing itself. I myself would like to see the 40B housing not be 40B housing, but to be a mixed use buildings. So the T can bring people in so they can work in this town, and then use the train to get back. So it can be working both ways for business, economic, and for the T workings. But right now, the planning board is hoping for the fall town meeting to bring this up. So I'm thinking that they were going around in circles, with the maybes and ifs. They got a lot of questions. They haven't got a lot of answers. Thank you.
That's actually a pretty good summary, Mark. A lot of questions, not a lot of answers out there. So, okay. Does anybody have any questions about the articles, town meeting in general? If not, that concludes our special pre-town meeting forum. Again, town meeting is this Wednesday, May 1st, starting at 7 p.m. The warrant can be found on the website. The warrant includes the warrant articles themselves as well as the FinCom Finance Committee recommendations. Again, the moderator is pretty strict on starting on time, that's been his practice. I don't see him changing that this year. So if you want to get there for the first article, make sure you get there on time. But again, town meeting, it's an opportunity for you as a citizen to come and actually participate and be a part of major decisions that affect the town, not just now, but in the future. So I hope to see you there, and everybody have a good afternoon. Thank you.